So you want to abolish the United Nations?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Of course. It is the epicenter of evil in the world. People don't realize this. It is the epicenter.
Wow. So you really put it at the feet of the United Nations, all of this?
Yes. The United Nations and Hamas are in bed together.
Okay, now you have to explain that to me.
The United Nations is...
Because I haven't seen them saying they're in bed together. I mean, the United Nations are not pro-Hamas.
Yes, they are.
Well, okay.
Oh, yes, they are.
Convince me.
Mr. Guterres, however you pronounce his name, who is the Director General of the UN.
Yeah.
On October 7, said basically, terrible what happened, but, it's Israel's fault. It's the United Nations. The supposed crucible of peace and justice in the world. The arbiter of peace and justice in the world. That's where they started. Then you look at what they have done over Israel. It is astounding. The UN Human Rights Council is a joke. It has kleptocracies and tyrannies on the Human Rights Council all the time. It has a standing order, as it were, to treat Israel quite differently from any other country. Israel, the one democracy in the Middle East, has had more resolutions against it at the Human Rights Council of the United Nations than I think all the other countries of the world put together. Just imagine, one democracy in the Middle East. I mean, all those terrible tyrannies. This is insane. I can go through this, UN staff, not just anti-Israel, but profoundly anti-Semitic. They make these appalling anti-Semitic comments, and they go on and on. Come to October 7, and the focus is on the United Nations Relief and Works Department, UNRWA, which administers humanitarian aid, schools, aid in Gaza. And what do we find? We find, long story short, that thousands of them are Hamas operatives. They're Hamas operatives. And the UN denies it. It supports them. They are the UN. They are the UN. And, we found, was it last week, the week before, the Israelis found a major Hamas terror center in an UNRWA, either school or medical facility. The hospitals are all UNRWA, are all Hamas terror facilities. What the Israelis have found. The UN is silent about this, but also says it's all lies. When I say silent, it has never admitted it to any of it. It's never expressed any concern, despite copious evidence. So that's why I say the UN is in bed with Hamas. And when you look at, the conflicts in the rest of the world, I mean, the UN, look at Syria, Russia. The idea that Russia and China have a Security Council presence which can affect the binding decisions of the United Nations. This is insane. How can you have Russia and China in such a position? How can you have countries like Iran in such a position in the human rights part of the UN? I mean, does no one sit and actually think about this? People do, but it's like an inertia, because people are still fixated on this idea that in order to have global peace and justice, you must have a global institution. Well, no, if most of the countries of the world are tyrannies and kleptocracies and deniers of human rights and genocidists and imperialists and rogues of one kind or another, if you have a global body, it's going to be dominated by these people. So how can that global body ever be the arbiter of peace and justice? On the contrary. So the break on this is this in the Security Council, the veto power of America. All right? Okay. So that has prevented the worst of this from taking place in terms of Security Council resolutions by bad people being thwarted. Okay. But nevertheless, you've got the rest of the UN, which is regarded as the arbiter of peace and justice. And for much of the West, and certainly for the entire progressive part of the West, but also the non-progressive part of the West, everyone accepts, just assumes that the UN is basically beneficent, a force for good in the world. It might be a little ineffectual, but a force for good. No.
You in your book, Londonistan, published in 2006, you describe an allergy to the concept of nationalism, or what might be described as patriotism or nation-statism in a sort of Westphalian sense. And so there was a cultural reach for something greater. And I can't remember the exact term that you use, it's sort of a progressive reach away from anything that felt too parochial. And it seems to me that underlies why it will be controversial to hear you say abolish the UN, is because people are actually allergic to what the alternative I think you're suggesting or implicitly suggesting, which is nation-statism.
Yes, I know. People are very allergic to it. People think that the nation state is the source historically of war, which is true. Wars were fought between nations. That's undeniably true. They also think, and this is sort of separate but related, that the Western nation state is a repository of all evil in the world. That the Western nation state is dominated by white people who are intrinsically racist and oppressive and colonialist, and so the Western nation state is the expositor of all these terrible things, and therefore, in order to abolish terrible things like prejudice and xenophobia and warmongering and violence between peoples, you abolish the nation. You abolish the nation state, but you supersede the nation state by a kind of carapace of internationalism.
Exactly,
and that has been the kind of on dit. That's been the sort of basic premise that the West has had for a long time now. So what am I saying? So people say, oh, so you want to return to the nation state, you want to return to war. Well, I want to return to the ability for a people to have self-determination and express that self-determination of its own culture through its own laws that it elects people to pass. And if that means that sometimes they are going to come up against aggressive other states aggressing against them, well, then they have to fight that aggression in whatever way they choose, not necessarily by military means. In the last analysis, in my view, unless you actually make the other person, unless you make the aggressor believe that you would, in the last resort, use military force, then you can't really get anywhere. But nevertheless, there are many things you can do before you get to military force. So basically, you defend your nation. If you can't defend your nation, you cannot defend the culture that's in that nation. If you are a liberal society based on liberal democracy, liberal democratic principles, which the West is, you cannot defend those principles in your nation if you don't have a nation. You can't defend them through universalism. There is no universal agreement on these things. You defend them in your territory, which you define through borders, which you police, governed by laws which you pass through your parliaments. That is the whole basis of national self-determination. So the people who say, oh, if you want a nation back, then if you want the primacy of the nation back, then you want to make war again. Well, no, I want the ability of people to live freely in accordance with their own culture. That's what I want. If they have to defend that against people who are aggressing against that, then they have to take measures, condign measures, economic or military, to defend it. You don't get anywhere by saying, you don't make a better world by saying, well, let's abolish the nation, because then you have not John Lennon's Imagine, you have a war of all against all in which the strong win over the weak, which is kind of what we're seeing. We're seeing a Europe which it subscribes to universalist principles, generally speaking. And what do we see? We see Putin's Russia, we see Xi's China, and they can't cope with it. They don't do war anymore. They only do law. They do negotiation and compromise. And they've got people who are saying, we can't believe how open this is for us. And Iran is saying, these people are crazy. But I mean, it's the opportunities for us are now legion. And that's partly why, all these mobs on the streets of London and other Western cities since October 7, they sense it. We've got them. That's what's behind these demonstrations. We've got them. We can see how weak they are.